Folks, American foreign policy, I think, has to be purposeful and inspiring, based on clear goals driven by sound strategies. Every president, Democrat and Republican, in modern history prior to Donald Trump, has understood and carried out this basic directive.
You know, a couple of years ago, Joe Biden sold himself to the American people as a foreign policy heavyweight. It was during the election last year, and claimed President Trump was ruining America's reputation abroad. The liberal media, academics and pundits backed him to the hilt and suggested things could only get better under Biden. How wrong they were. The Taliban is now in control of Afghanistan, and Americans are fleeing the capital, Kabul. People are comparing these chaotic scenes to the fall of Saigon in 1975, when US forces fled Vietnam. So what does the Biden administration and his mainstream media allies do now? Well, they're blaming everyone but themselves. For the Biden administration, the options to spin the chaos in Afghanistan are extremely limited, especially after the president painted himself into a corner just 5 weeks ago.
Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy. The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
His predictions were frivolous and were quickly disproved by the Taliban, which took over Afghanistan in what seemed like the blink of an eye. Last month, they controlled just this much territory, the areas in red. Now, they run practically the entire country and have even changed its name to the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. These ruthless men are now Afghanistan's rulers and are acknowledged as such by China, Russia, and a number of others. They sit in the presidential palace, vacated by the surrendering president, Ashraf Ghani, who fled Afghanistan as soon as the Taliban entered Kabul over the weekend. All of Biden's predictions have turned to dust, and Americans are leaving in a cloud of chaos, causing pundits to make comparisons with US forces fleeing Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War back in 1975. So, how does the Biden administration deal with all this? By declaring mission accomplished, of course.
This is not Saigon. We went to Afghanistan 20 years ago with one mission, and that mission was to deal with the folks who attacked us on 9/11. And we have succeeded in that mission.
And what about the mainstream US media and the boorish satirists who once sung his praises?
CNN can now project that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. I'm supposed to be a neutral news anchor, but God, that feels good.
Part of their reaction has been to blame the previous president, Donald Trump, for signing a power-sharing deal with the Taliban in the first place. But Republicans have pushed back on that.
Yes, it's Joe Biden's fault. Mike Pompeo and President Trump made it very clear to the Taliban, when we're out, you are not touching an American. They made clear that there were deterrence models, there were ways to make sure that we kept that country safe. Biden, it's crumbling.
Faced with that argument and the fact that Joe Biden had the power to adapt Trump's Taliban deal if he wanted, even his allies in the liberal media are turning on him now.
How did President Biden get this so wrong?
How do you explain getting this so wrong?
So there are failures on so many levels.
Well, on Monday, President Biden finally came out to defend himself in front of the press, and he began by taking responsibility for what is happening in Afghanistan.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me.
Now, while Biden says the buck stops with him, he's only referring to the big strategic decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, which was actually made by Donald Trump back in February last year. He certainly wasn't prepared to take responsibility for all the tactical errors on the ground which have led to all the chaos. Here's his explanation.
So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
Biden also said that the last-minute chaotic attempts to evacuate Afghans who'd helped American forces out of the country was partly as a result of Afghans being reluctant to leave sooner.
I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence.
OK, let's bring the first of our guests in now, and we're joined by Torek Farhadi, a former advisor to the Afghan government during the Hamid Karzai administration. Torek, welcome to The Nexus. We've just heard from President Joe Biden speaking on Monday. What he said was, to some, rather callous, blaming the Afghans, the political leadership, and also the Afghan military. What do you make of those remarks?
Well, President Ghani, now the fugitive president of Afghanistan, had misled a lot of people. He had misled his co-workers in Afghanistan that he is all-powerful, and he has misled the United States for many years about his 300,000 strong army, and it turned out that he had a lot of ghost soldiers. President Ghani never went to the war front, never shared a meal with the real soldier who was fighting on the war front, and he always received a number of commandos filtered into his palace. In fact, there was a large gap between Ghani and the people of Afghanistan, and that's why the government fell, and nobody was willing to fight for him. So it's a reality that corruption went skyrocketing during his reign, and the Americans got tired of spending their taxpayer money with a government that was that corrupt.
And is it realistic to say that Joe Biden didn't know all of this? He didn't know that the military would capitulate so quickly, and that Ghani would scurry off to, what is it, Uzbekistan and now the UAE? Are you telling me that he didn't know that?
He did. He did. And in fact, Donald Trump has given an interview in the Newsweek. He also knew this. One of the reasons the United States got tired of the situation in Afghanistan is that they were stuck with a corrupt group that unfortunately they had created. This was a propped-up regime, and it transformed in a regime which was like a serum, taking its financial perfusion from the United States mostly. But a lot of this money, whether it's the salaries of the soldiers or whether it's the money for fuel for the Afghan army, was being stolen from in the presidential palace from the people that the United States tolerated for many years.
What did Biden do tactically wrong? I'm sure many will agree with the overall strategy of leaving Afghanistan, but tactically, the withdrawal on the ground, what could he have done better?
One is that he removed the conditionality of the withdrawal, so Taliban got emboldened, and they saw that there was no conditionality for peace, and they continued their attacks. One. Second is that the withdrawal of the interpreters and special immigrant visas was not really well organized. A superpower could do much better in terms of coordinating between the State Department and the other agencies that took care of that. In fact, President Biden announced in the month of April that he wants to leave without a condition. Right. And now we're towards the end of August. And how can a superpower like the United States wait until the last minutes to do this?
Well, this this is the criticism in the United States coming especially from the Republicans, that it wasn't President Trump's decision to withdraw that is the problem. It is that Joe Biden didn't stick to the conditions imposed by the agreement. And that's what you agree with that, do you?
Yes, yes. It really paralyzed the peace negotiations because the withdrawal of the U.S. forces were without condition. And we can understand it. They just got exhausted that Ashraf Ghani was playing for time. In fact, Ashraf Ghani didn't make any progress on the peace talks because he was hoping that Joe Biden would react differently. But it came out of the water completely different. And Joe Biden said, no, we are leaving because we know you're playing a game to keep us here. And we don't want to be a pawn in your negotiations, which will never result in anything acceptable to the Taliban. Then the Taliban won the war now. We have to understand that who won the war. We cannot say nobody won the war. They're in Kabul without a single bullet fired. They're in the presidential palace. And all the leaders in Afghanistan, the majority of the leaders are trying to seek them to create a government which could include them.
Torek Farhadi, thank you so much for that. Much appreciated. Now, let's turn to how this withdrawal will affect, or may affect, America's security now. What will happen now the United States doesn't have a physical, large-scale presence in Afghanistan? Well, the president seems confident.
We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States in the region.
Well, we're joined now by Barry Pavel, who was a security advisor in both the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations. Barry, thank you for joining us. We've just heard there from President Joe Biden, we've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats of the United States from the region. Do you buy that, or do you think it's necessary to have a large physical presence in Afghanistan?
Well, I think there is a middle ground where certainly helpful to have a small military presence, I think, in the country. But obviously 20 years and the enormous casualties and risks that the coalition suffered were determined, I think rightly so, to be too much. But obviously better to have eyes and ears in country than outside. But when you have a Taliban-controlled country, that creates a whole different situation. We want our forces to be welcomed wherever they're hosted, and if they're not welcome, that could create enormous new problems as well. But I do worry about more terrorist threats emanating from a Taliban-led Afghanistan.
Right. Well, the stated purpose of going in there in the first place was to make sure there was never another 9/11. Are you saying that it is now more likely, having withdrawn entirely, that there could be another large-scale attack on the United States that emanated and was planned in Afghanistan?
Yes, I worry very much about that. Looking back over 20 years, there was not another large-scale terrorist attack like 9/11. So that's an important success that people should be thinking about and thankful of all the service and sacrifice that so many have endured for that really important outcome. But looking forward, I worry very much about terrorists of all sorts with online connectivity, which they didn't have in the 1990s, but now have. And so I worry very much about terrorists' ability in Afghanistan to train, recruit, operate, plan, and then conduct attacks against Europe and the United States. I worry very much about that, and I think we need to be extremely vigilant and do whatever we can to prevent that from occurring.
One of the conditions of the Trump-Taliban deal is that the Taliban would not permit terrorist organizations, to plan such attacks. Do you trust the Taliban to keep to that part of the deal, at least?
I don't trust the Taliban to keep to any part of any deal, period. I don't see any basis for any sort of trust regarding any agreement. It would be wonderful to be pleasantly surprised, but I don't see that as a likely outcome. So we should plan for the worst case, and we should make sure we use all instruments of power from Europe and the United States to try to ensure that the worst outcomes do not come to pass.
Just one quick question about the withdrawal itself. If you were advising this president, as you have done two former presidents, what would you have told him about the tactics on the ground?
Well, I'm not a tactician, but I do think that, again, I think the speed took a lot of the government officials by surprise. But I think, again, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I don't think that the preparations for the worst case, a very rapid takeover by the Taliban, obviously those were not done very well. Was this an intelligence failure, a planning failure, a policy failure? It's really important to learn those lessons because we will be doing this again at some point in the future. People should remember that. So how do we make sure that as we do so in whatever year we end up doing it, in whatever place, 2028, 2029, that we know how to do it better and we can do a better job to protect ourselves.
Barry, Pavel, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. Let's just take a look at some of the evacuations taking place at Kabul airport now. And these are pictures from Sunday night, and we see Afghans crowding into one of the C-17 transport aircrafts. And then we got this picture taken from inside the plane. We also have some of the communications between the pilot and ground control.
Okay, how many people do you think are on your jet? 800 people on your jet? Holy cow.
The following day, there were these incredible images of thousands of Afghans running alongside another C-17 as it prepared to take off. And as we know, with the tragic outcome of some people falling from the plane as it ascended. Okay, let's bring in Fazelhaq Haqmal now. He is an American Afghan who fought with the US Army in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2013. Fazelhaq, thank you so much for joining us on The Nexus. Let me start, as we've just been playing pictures of people desperately trying to leave Afghanistan with that issue. You know a lot of people there who are trying to flee the country to get to safety. Can you tell me a bit about their predicament right now?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Because of who is in charge of Afghanistan now, because of who has been put in charge of Afghanistan, you have a bunch of thugs, drug traffickers, criminals, and terrorists that have taken over Afghanistan by toppling a democratic government, a republic that was heavily respected and supported by the Afghan people. The majority of the brightest, the educated, the progressivists now do not see them living under a regime that is literally, that lacks a coherence. That does not provide them the protection, that would not provide them the protection, that would not respect the civil rights and liberties.
We've just heard from Torek Farhadi, who was an advisor to the Hamid Karzai government. He said that the previous government of Ashraf Ghani was anything but respected. It was corrupt and it wasn't able to pay the military, which is why the whole thing collapsed so quickly.
He has his own opinion, but the Afghan government, I am not going to rule out the corruption. I'm not gonna say that there were soldiers not paid. Yet the Afghan government, the Afghan National Security Forces had those days where soldiers were not paid on time. There was a lot of corruption, but that's not why the government unraveled. That's not why the Afghan National Security Forces unraveled and is now as got wiped out. The reality is that the Taliban had a strong backing and support of the Pakistani military. They were providing them support. They were helping them with their strategic communication, with messaging. Much of what came out of the Doha agreement, throughout the entire process, that the Afghan government was excluded in the very crucial moments of Doha negotiation, and that led into providing a narrative to the Taliban that, look, the Afghan government, the Afghan National Security Forces has been sold out. They do not have a future in the future government.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of it. That kind of demoralized the Afghan National Security Forces. I do not think that corruption is the only reason why the Afghan government and the National Security Forces collapsed.
Well, you mentioned the Doha talks. Does that mean that you are blaming President Trump, or do you put more blame on President Joe Biden when it comes to this chaos that we're now seeing?
Well, I understand that the American people wanted the U.S. presence to end in Afghanistan, but I also understand that the American people wanted a honorable end to their presence in Afghanistan, a honorable withdrawal, not what we see today. I think there was a strategic opportunity lost by both administrations by giving a lot of leverage, by giving a lot of legitimacy to the Taliban in peace negotiation.
You risked your life fighting with US forces against the Taliban, and you know it's been 20 years, and a lot of people are saying it's all for nothing. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm in touch with many vets. Most of them were my battle buddies. We were deployed to Afghanistan. We're all heartbroken by what we see today in Afghanistan. I believe we could have done a better job implementing the withdrawal. We could have done a better job, holding the peace talks. Ultimately, the fights, the war needed to end. We were looking for a peaceful end. We're all heartbroken, and now we're hoping to focus on what could we do, what best we could do to help the situation on the ground and the future for the Afghan people.
Fazelhaq Haqmal, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Yep. Much appreciated. Now, as we've mentioned, many pundits and experts are comparing what's happening in Afghanistan to the fall of Saigon. These were the chaotic scenes in 1975 as the US withdrew from Vietnam. Helicopters flying above the US Embassy have become iconic images in world history. Well, joining us now is Captain Gerry Berry, who took part in the evacuation of the American Embassy during the fall of Saigon back in '75. Captain Berry, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
As you'll know, you hear these pundits on CNN, MSNBC, all this crowd, talking about what's happening in Kabul as Saigon on steroids. What are the actual similarities and differences?
Well, I can tell you actually that the biggest disparity is for the evacuation of Saigon, we had a plan. There were 4 options to the plan. I think leadership was a little slow in executing the plan, which caused the last option, the frequent the helicopter evacuation, to be executed after they shut down the runway with rockets at Tan Son Nhut and Saigon. Here in Afghanistan, as everything I've read and looked at, there is no plan. This is absolute chaos. And for us veterans, I think, probably shouldn't say it, but President Biden was the diva of draft dodgers back during the Vietnam War. He probably had more deferments than anybody else in the history of our country. So I sometimes doubt his leadership ability in these kind of crises.
So this kind of thing leads back to the commander-in-chief at the White House?
Yes, everything leads back to there. And that was also part of the slowness in getting the evacuation done in Saigon. It's sometimes you have great plans, but if the leadership's not there, not going to happen.
Can we talk about the day you went to go and fetch the ambassador from the embassy in Saigon? As I understand it, he wasn't ready, and you ended up flying dozens of rescue missions with Vietnamese and third country staff and so on. Can you tell us about that day?
Yes, that's true. I went in for the first flight. I was supposed to get him out, and he refused to go. I have no idea what to do. So we started taking Vietnamese, third country nationals, and Americans out. And this goes on for the whole day. And then as we had 75 working helicopters, but as the day went on, the weather got worse. You could see the tanks coming down the road. And at
you're talking about
3 o'clock in the morning.
You're talking about the tanks of the North Vietnamese army.
You're exactly right. The North Vietnamese tanks, you could see them on the highway probably about 2 or 3 in the morning. They were coming down with lights on. Now, here's the issue with that. At about 3 in the morning, we only had 2 airplanes flying, myself and my wingman. So at 4 in the morning, I make the call to helicopter direction control. I said, here's the 4 issues. We only have 2 helicopters flying. I can see the tanks coming down the road. The crowd at the embassy is still the same size it was at 1 in the afternoon, and the ambassador's still here.
Yeah.
So they recognize that. So when I landed at 4:56 in the morning, I made the decision, the Henry Kissinger didn't make it. President Ford didn't make it and they had direct comm with the ambassador. The general and the admiral didn't make it. I'd made the decision that I wasn't leaving the roof until the ambassador was on board. And of course, to give it a little emphasis, I told him the president sends, he was on board in 2 minutes. So I think he just wanted direction, somebody to order him out. So at 4:56 in the morning, we flew the ambassador off the roof of Saigon to the USS Blue Ridge in the South China Sea, and then we went back after the Marines. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
And that is why sometimes you're known as the man who ended the Vietnam War. Captain Gerry Berry, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube, type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.